7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Mr. Wylie, I'm very interested in your analysis of the role of SCL that worked with Cambridge Analytica and Aggregate IQ on some of these international projects that I believe you referred to as a form of new neo-colonialism. Would you say that that's the correct term that you used, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, so I've had several conversations now with governments or representatives of governments in different countries, and one of the things that has become very apparent is that you might have a country that gained independence, and the former colonizer left, but corporate interests didn't. And so, what I mean by neocolonialism is, rather than state action or government action to control via a governor the affairs of a particular country, you have large multinational companies or wealthy individuals from oftentimes the former colonizer coming in and seeking to interfere with the elections in a way that resources, for example, can continue to be extracted. In a way that is conducive for business interests in that former colonizer. So what I meant by that is that colonialism still happens in a lot of these places. It just doesn't look like the form that it did, 100 years ago.
Right. No, I think this is fascinating because I'm looking at the work of SCL, Cambridge Analytica, AIQ in Nigeria, Trinidad, elsewhere, and it's like some kind of Frederick Forsyth novel with cyber geeks. So I just want to go through a bit of this. So in the Nigeria campaign, there was the question of this video, the murder video that was to incite ethnic hatred. That was brought forward by a Cambridge Analytica operator that was supposedly given to AIQ. In Trinidad Tobago, there's allegations that illegal data was collected and harvested, the de-anonymizing of, I think, emails, was that correct? And AIQ was involved with that?
Clickstream data. Internet browsing history.
Right, browsing history, right. And so AIQ worked with Cambridge Analytica for SCL on those projects?
Yes.
Okay. And you had stated that this is a company that's gone around the world and has undermined democratic elections in all kinds of countries. And they could not care less as to whether their work is compliant because they like to win. That's correct on SCL and the culture that came out of Cambridge Analytica and Aggregate IQ?
That was the impression that I got when I was there.
And so the Canadian government paid SCL to run psychological operations in Latvia, and said that SCL...
The NATO Stratcom Center.
The NATO Stratcom Center. And it was promoted by Canadian Ambassador Alain Hauser and the Latvian Secretary of Defense, that they would use the SCL team of experts in target audience analysis. Would that be somewhat similar to what they could have done in Brexit, this target audience analysis? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so target audience analysis, or TAA, is what militaries is the starting point for information operations in a military context, and it's something that SCL specialized in. So the idea of TAA is to if you take a step back for a moment and look at information operations as a military endeavor, is part of what's called a multi-dimensional battle space, where you as a military client are trying to seek out dominance in all of those spaces, whether it's land, sea, air, space, or indeed information. So TAA is the starting point where you look for the information space around your target and identify weaknesses or vulnerabilities in that information space, whether to deny your opponent information or whether to provide them with information which is conducive to your operational objective.
I guess I'm interested because, what the part of the tail of this big dog that we've grabbed is the illegal end. And so we just see these guys as dodgy operators who are out to do dodgy things. And yet they get hired by NATO to do dodgy things on behalf of the Canadian people. And now they've morphed into Aimer data that seems to be all the same players, but they also include financial links to Blackwater, the mercenary group, and they worked with Black Cube, Israeli Black Ops operators. how are we to navigate a space where a large corporate interest can do completely illegal things in one context and then yet be brought in by governments to do favors for them in others?
So the one thing that I would say is that information operations is not always nefarious, or it's not always a bad thing. So if you think of a conflict...
You said that this is a company that's gone around the world and undermined democratic elections. They don't care whether their work is compliant because they like to win. I mean, this is a corporate culture we're dealing with.
Yes, sorry, I just, a broader point on, for example, projects that Canada funds, for example. Just because Canada funds an IO project does not mean that Canada is intending on undermining democracy around the world. When you look at, for example, counter-extremism, where if you seek to confuse or interfere with the operations or communications of an extremist group or of a terrorist group, that is ultimately a denial of their agency. But in that context, that may be appropriate.
I get that. I guess the question
that is
from
not appropriate
I guess the question for me for legislation is, if we have companies that engage in nefarious, illegal activities, but then we can say, well, the enemy of my enemy is now my friend. How do we legislate companies that seem to be so willing to break the law, but then still get government contracts because it's useful to have them do other work elsewhere? I mean, this is something we need to be talking about, but we haven't really dealt with this. I'm asking your opinion from having worked inside with them.
Right. So I think when you take a step back, Canadians often, and rightly so, think of Canada as a country that goes around the world and promotes democracy, right? So in doing so, you are strengthening civic institutions and you are helping people participate. When you look at actions of Canadian companies, for example, Aggregate IQ, they are doing the exact opposite of that. Canada, as a country, does not know about that activity because it does not require, for example, proactive registration of any kind of activity in a foreign election. So one of the things that I've been speaking to American members of Congress about is, in the same way that you have to register foreign agents who are lobbying or conducting work in the United States, you should also have a registry of companies that are doing work outside in other elections or electoral contexts, to allow oversight, whether that is government oversight or civic society oversight, of the operations of companies in other elections. I don't know if the Canadian government was aware that SCL also had an elections division. So, one of the things that could be done is better due diligence about what are the other projects and activities that the company that is being contracted by the Canadian government is doing in other places. Simply the question, what other projects have you done in the past 2 years, or are you currently working on, and are any of those political?
Thank you.